Why is it? Same establishment underlying what's going on. Now, I'll get to that in just a second. I frequently tell you on the program that journalists and the others are involved in journalism activism. Now, that sort of kicked in the 70s. It really picked up steam in the 80s in terms of the institutes of higher learning that taught either broadcast journalism or print journalism. For a long time, they were pretty well separated. Now there's somewhat of a blurring thanks to the internet, and people are involved in doing both things, the internet and cable television, etc. But there was a story that came out this week that illustrates what I'm talking about activism. And Michael Nunez in Gizmodo wrote the report. I'm going to read just a couple of paragraphs, quote from it. Facebook workers routinely suppress news stories of interest to conservative readers from the social network's influential trending news section, according to a former journalist who worked on the project. The individual says that workers prevented stories about the right-wing CPAC gathering recently, Mitt Romney, Rand Paul, and other conservative topics from appearing in the highly influential section of Facebook, even though they were organically trending among the site's users. So the users wanted to do it, but Facebook suppressed it. Several former Facebook news curators, as they were known internally, also told Gizmodo that they were instructed to artificially inject selected stories into the trending news module, even if they weren't popular enough to warrant inclusion, or in some cases weren't trending at all. The former curators, all of whom worked as contractors, also said they were directed not to include news about Facebook itself in the trending module. So what does all of this mean? Well, back in the 80s, they began to tell journalists, the young journalists coming up, that their job was to shape public opinion, not to report the news. That even in the reporting of the news, they were to inject things that would shape the public mindset to take them toward the outcomes that the journalist elites thought they should reach. That's what you're seeing today. As opposed to when I started into journalism and news reporting went on the news pages and opinion went on the opinion pages. Even in television, we used to have editorials, usually done by the general managers of TV stations. You know, the following is an editorial by James Simon, news director of WBBM television, and he would get on and do a 1-minute shtick on a particular political item that they wanted to present to the public using the television station's View or NBC, whoever it was. And then that was the demand for equal time. The demand for equal time says, wait a minute, because there are a limited number of channels, and at the time there were. You just had a limited number of channels, either television or radio. Therefore, the FCC decreed that you had to give an equal amount of time to an opposing opinion. So a qualified representative could come in and record an opposing opinion to that editorial. That's where the idea of equality of time came from. Later on, it would be distorted, as all progressive agendas do, tend to distort an already established precedent and transform that into something which would prohibit talk radio from existing. They wanted to require talk radio stations to provide equal time to different types of opinion. So for every conservative you hired, you'd have to hire a liberal. Now, this was a maneuver. Was it equal time? No, because the mainline networks and all of the news that you heard from most of the media were favoring the left. I mean, the people in the media are left of left. Quite often their lives are a disaster, I'll be honest with you. They don't keep marriages together, and we could go with a list of blah, blah, blahs as far as how radical a lot of their beliefs have been. But you didn't need that, and what happened is talk radio in the 80s began to form the balance to that. So if you wanted the conservative opinion, you flipped on the talk radio. If you wanted the liberal opinion, you watched the news. Then came the talkie channels, and the talkie channels changed a lot of that. First of all, Fox News made such a hit. Then the left began calling that pure propaganda. What Fox News did, believe it or not, was just bring it back toward the center. We had gone so far left in terms of the general thinking, everybody began assuming that was the new norm. And so when people said, whoa, wait a minute, come back over here, those people who were over on the left said, well, wait a minute, that's extreme right. Say, this was how the things have played out. And then the internet got tangled in with it. Now, what does all this mean about Facebook? What it really means is that Facebook's news section operates like a traditional newsroom, reflecting the biases of its workers and the institutional imperatives of the corporation, imposing editorial values onto the lists of stories that are going to be presented. What is it I say at the beginning of the program? They do this by reporting some stories and not reporting others, reporting some facts and not reporting other facts. It's not lying, it's just distorting what you are hearing or those stories to which you have access. The other thing that I've begun noticing is, if you use one of the main news servers like Gmail or Yahoo, and there's a whole clutch of them there, I've begun noticing that a suspicious amount of right-wing material winds up in the spam folder, and you have to go in and pull it out. I think probably we'll see another scandal on that one in the near future, and that they literally, because in the minds of the radical left, and that tends to be the media types, they can't distinguish between right-wing views and extremist views. To them, it's a big blur. And organizations such as the Southern Poverty Law Center have contributed to that by smearing IDs and traits over large numbers of organizations. And it's all part of a political system designed to favor their viewpoint and diminish the viewpoint of the other. It is anything but a level playing field. And so if you're trying to get to who's who at the zoo, it's very difficult to do. But as I said, what I'm trying to do is give you the benefit of my background in this industry. My wife and I both have had careers in this. And I remember before we started Steel on Steel back in 1990, and I got laid off from a company that I was working for, which is common in this business. When contracts expire, then you have to go look for more work. It's just the way it works. Okay. As a matter of fact, I came home that night and I said to my wife, I said, well, I got laid off today. What's for dinner? We'd been through this so much. It was common. It wasn't like this. Oh, my gosh, what's going to happen? But God had seen us through all of it, and led us to the next thing he wanted for us to do. So let's turn toward the idea of globalism. When what is logical doesn't seem to be happening, this is another principle that I've derived over the years of watching what's going on, then some other agenda is afoot. Where did I begin to notice this? I began to notice this when I was just a young assistant editor, still wet behind the feet, not to mention the ears, working in a newsroom at an all-news radio station in San Francisco, a KCBS News Radio, which is still on the air, 740. KCBS San Francisco. And I got to work with two guys who were really bright, both of whom are deceased. Jim Simon was known as one of the fathers of talk radio. He became the news director shortly after I got there, and I got to work as his assistant. A strange couple here, you have to admit. And so he was a Jehovah's Witness who had been Greek Orthodox. We used to have conversations about that. And the other one was just a crackerjack newsman who taught me how to just get to where I needed to go to do what I needed to do to make it happen. And that was Norm Woodruff. And Norm Woodruff was a leading figure in the gay community in San Francisco. Like I said, strange thing, but these two guys were really sharp. And I knew I was smart, but I knew that I didn't know, which is something more than a lot of millennials today. And so what I did is I tagged on to them, and it was just intoxicating to work in the newsroom every day because of the challenges and the ups and downs. But one of the things I began to notice early on was that there was this marked difference between the blah, 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 blah that politicians would say and what would ultimately come out. And I kept saying, why is it they talk this, they talk that, and then all of a sudden, kaboo-boo, something else goes on out over there. And then I realized, this was my first revelation. This is FPC. Those things are for public consumption. They have nothing to do with reality. It's part of the surface game, but the real stuff is going on underneath. Then I came to realize that there were different levels of underneath as far as politics and the power brokers that underlie the politics, which a lot of times have money, and the elitists that underlie that. And so you've got multiple levels. And there is not only movement along the levels, there is movement up and down between the levels. It's like a three-dimensional chessboard. And after you see it like that, then you go, I understand what's happening. And that's what you're seeing play out today. So we're throwing out one rascal and putting another rascal in. Probably not much is going to change. I think this group may be just as disappointed with Donald Trump if he is elected. Hillary's a known quantity based on her years with her husband's administration and some of the things that she did there, and subsequently as Secretary of State and as Senator. So that's sort of a known issue. Donald Trump is an unknown. Unknown issues can either be good or bad. Adolf Hitler was an unknown. Germany was in a mess. People were tired of the political system. They voted to put the Nazis in, despite all of the thuggery that the brown shirts were involved in. Hitler was an unknown. But I have election posters. I have digital files of election posters in Germany. Like, women, think of your children, vote Hitler. Today, you'd go, what? Because he guaranteed he was going to take Germany out of the malaise in which it found itself. He was going to do something. And what he did is promise them indirectly hope and change. Well, not in those words, but that's what he was guaranteeing. And he did that. Put Germany back on its feet, gave them a sense of purpose, got the economy running again, got the industry running again, got the military running again, even though he wasn't supposed to, based on things that were signed at Versailles. And if he had stopped at that and not gotten into the World War, not looked for Lebensraum, not pushed into the Sudetenland, and above all, not exterminated so many Jews, he probably would have gone down as one of Germany's greatest leaders next to Bismarck. People would say, he was a madman. No, he was not a madman. He was a genius, a demented genius in certain ways, but he was a genius. And if you ever listen to his speeches, they become hypnotic. They literally do. They become hypnotic, even looking back now and listening to what Adolf Hitler was. That's just what he did. And it wasn't until later on, even when, what you have to realize that when World War II ended, the Germans were all stunned. They couldn't figure out what had happened because the rhetoric to which they were treated and the reality that finally came home were two different things. That's what we're facing here in this country today. The rhetoric that we're hearing and the reality of where we're going economically, radically two different things. The rhetoric of Black Lives Matter and don't you care about racism or are you a xenophobe and all of that is radically different from the end game that the global elites wish to see us arrive upon. And each issue is simply another stepping stone to get us to where we need to go. And so whatever the issue is, real or imagined, doesn't make any difference. It leads us to the next squabble and the next stage. What's the first tactic? The first tactic is to contain the debate. The debate at each stage is contained within each area of the debate. And that way, nobody can look. It's like partitions. In order to get to a destination, you have to climb out of one cubicle and go to the next cubicle and climb over that and climb over this and climb over that. So in each partition that you're in, you can't see what's going on in the other cubicles. And there's a purpose for that. If you told people where they were going right out, there would be a revolt almost immediately. So that doesn't happen. This is where agendas come in. It's different from a conspiracy. A conspiracy is a deep, dark, secret group of people meeting under a naked light bulb with green visors, smoking cigars in a back room somewhere, deciding to do something and keep it secret. These are much more open. Marilyn Ferguson wrote a very important book in the 1980s. It was published called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And she described what was going on. And she said it's not really a conspiracy like in traditional ones. It's very open. It's an open conspiracy simply of like-minded people across a network of organizations who are working toward common goals. That's an agenda. It's much different than a deep, dark conspiracy. But if you notice, part of the containing people in cubicles is when you say, boy, I'm really worried about this immigration stuff. You're a xenophobe. In other words, what is that designed to do? That is designed to shame you and to shut you. That's it. Shame you and shut you, the S&S procedure, rather than having intellectual debate about a complex topic. By the way, they just tried that on the Prime Minister of Hungary. I don't know if you noticed that. And he said, that's ridiculous. He said, this is a very complex issue. You just can't deal with it by calling me a xenophobe. So, see, he understands too. Why are we going through everything that we're going through? Let's go back to Alger Hiss. Oh, by the way, before I do that, the whole purpose of keeping the debate contained and to shut you up with cliche, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe, you're a hater, you're a conspiracy theorist, blah, blah, blah. That is supposed to simply end the debate. And in the minds of many people who have been well programmed, it does.